Once worked together a long time ago. They're not friends now. They don't like each other. And yeah, 50 has taken every shot, especially when Diddy has been on a documentary. I think a lot of people thought that he was just joking around. It turns out he's not. So this is actually a real project that's being made under his G Unit.
Then there's the issue that quietly rattled legal observers the most: the sudden change to Diddy's prison release date. 9 days were shaved off his sentence with zero public explanation, and the timing couldn't have been worse. The adjustment appeared almost immediately after Christian's tweet began circulating and threatening to complicate the appeal process. Coincidence is the official word, but people who've worked around federal cases know better than to dismiss changes like that without asking questions. The Federal Bureau of Prisons isn't commenting, which is standard. But former officials and attorneys familiar with high-profile inmates say release date adjustments usually come with conditions attached. Sometimes it's credited good behavior. Sometimes cooperation. And in rare situations, it signals an agreement that hasn't yet been disclosed publicly. None of those possibilities look good when your appeal hinges on the claim that the system has treated you unfairly. What makes the timing even more suspicious is that the paperwork for the date change was filed the same week Christian's threat went viral. To some, it looked like the family needed a win, any win, to counterbalance the damage unfolding in real time. A shortened sentence, even by days, gives supporters something positive to point to, something to frame as momentum. But here's the contradiction. If Diddy's legal team truly had things under control, why allow Christian, someone with no legal training and no crisis management authority, to become the public face of their response? That decision alone suggests either panic or miscalculation. Unless, of course, the outburst itself wasn't meant to calm the situation at all. Some legal analysts believe the real strategy may have been provocation. The idea that baiting 50 Cent into an aggressive response could help reposition Diddy as the target of harassment rather than scrutiny. In theory, that gives the appeal team ammunition to argue bias, retaliation, or public pressure influencing legal outcomes. The problem is that theory collapsed instantly. 50 Cent's response wasn't emotional. It wasn't loud. It was surgical. His team came back with a formal $40 million defamation warning and documentation that changed the tone entirely. The leaked text chain showed Christian's own management pleading with him to stop before irreversible damage was done. That single reveal undercut any claim that the tweet was misunderstood or exaggerated. It showed internal panic. At that point, this stopped being a feud. It became evidence. Instead of flipping the narrative, Christian walked straight into a legal trap. Every move after that, the silence, the documentary delay, the sudden disappearance from social media, reinforced the perception that something had gone wrong behind the scenes. When even your own team is urging you to stand down, it's no longer about loyalty or defense. It's about damage control failing in real time. And that's the most dangerous position to be in. Because when you escalate against someone like 50 Cent without a clear plan, you're not just starting a fight. You're inviting scrutiny from people who don't miss details. And now, with subpoenas reportedly being drafted and private communications potentially on the table, that 9-day sentence reduction doesn't look like a victory at all. It looks like the calm before something much worse.
With the series, with the film?
I mean, I think the intention is to give a more full-bodied experience to what happened, from the people that agreed to sit down and to participate. And I feel like the film asks a lot of questions, maybe more questions are asked than answers given.
What makes this situation even more dangerous is how badly the Combs family appears to be misreading the room. They're operating as if public sympathy still works the way it did 10 years ago, as if emotion, loyalty, and proximity to fame can outweigh documented evidence and federal scrutiny. That era is gone. Today, perception isn't shaped by tears or testimonials. It's shaped by timelines, receipts, and patterns. And right now, the patterns aren't in their favor. Every move since the conviction has followed the same structure: deny, deflect, then emotionally overload the audience. The problem is that none of those tactics address the substance of the allegations. They don't explain inconsistencies. They don't resolve contradictions. They simply ask viewers to feel something and hope that feeling replaces judgment. But investigators don't work off vibes. They work off behavior. Take the timing of the documentary itself. Releasing a family-centered project while appeals are pending and related civil cases are still active is not neutral. It's aggressive. In legal terms, it can be interpreted as an attempt to influence public perception, potential jurors, and even witnesses. That's not speculation, it's precedent. Other high-profile defendants have seen similar media strategies backfire precisely because they created the impression of narrative manipulation. And then there's the issue of money. Producing a polished documentary while claiming financial and emotional devastation sends a mixed signal. If the family is truly overwhelmed, where is the funding coming from? Who approved the budget? Who signed off on distribution? Those questions matter because they establish control. And control is the one thing prosecutors always look for when determining whether someone is still exerting influence from inside a facility. Behind the scenes, sources close to the case say investigators are less interested in what the documentary claims and more interested in who coordinated it. Emails, contracts, phone calls. Every decision leaves a paper trail, and every trail tells a story. If any of those decisions trace back to Diddy himself, directly or indirectly, it opens an entirely new set of legal problems, not just for him, but for anyone acting on his behalf. That's where the Sons become vulnerable. Not because they committed crimes themselves, but because proximity plus obedience can blur into participation. If prosecutors can argue that Christian or Justin knowingly assisted in shaping messaging, managing communications, or silencing dissent, intent becomes irrelevant. Cooperation alone can trigger consequences. And that's the trap they may already be standing in without realizing it. What's especially troubling is how unprepared they seem for that reality. The documentary shows them speaking freely, emotionally, and at times recklessly. There's no sign of restraint. No sense that lawyers are guiding every sentence. That might play well to an audience looking for authenticity, but it plays terribly in a legal environment where every word can be dissected, timestamped, and replayed. At some point, the strategy stops being about defending Diddy and starts becoming about protecting everyone else. And the longer that realization is delayed, the smaller the window becomes. Because once investigators decide a line has been crossed, silence is no longer an option. It's a liability.
Didn't say anything, you would interpret it as hip-hop is fine with his behaviors. There's no one else being vocal. So you would look at it and just say, because that mind your business, or let me not say nothing about nothing, or those things, it would allow the entire culture to register as if they're for that.
The real issue here isn't just what Christian Combs said. It's when he said it. Timing is everything in federal cases, and in this situation, the timing could not have been worse. Diddy's entire appeal strategy is built around one central argument, that prosecutors overreached, mishandled evidence, and engaged in misconduct serious enough to taint the original conviction. That claim requires discipline, silence, and airtight optics. Instead, Christian just handed investigators the opposite. By publicly threatening 50 Cent, Christian didn't just create a headline. He potentially opened the door to new federal scrutiny, including allegations of witness intimidation or interference. To prosecutors, this looks less like a random emotional outburst and more like fresh behavior that contradicts the defense's narrative. Even the hint of obstruction is enough to complicate an appeal that was already on shaky ground. Adding fuel to the fire is a development that has yet to be publicly explained. Just days after the tweet incident, Diddy's projected release date was quietly adjusted, moved up by 9 days without any official reasoning from the Bureau of Prisons. No press release. No clarification. No paperwork made public. For people familiar with high-profile federal cases, unexplained changes like this rarely happen in a vacuum. They often signal internal reviews, compliance issues, or shifting classifications behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the Zeus Network documentary trailer promises something bold, that the lies will be exposed. But insiders who have viewed raw, unedited footage say the reality is far messier. Rather than a clean rebuttal, the footage reportedly captures Christian himself expressing confusion, frustration, and doubt, at one point openly admitting he doesn't even know what's real anymore. That's not the voice of a confident counteroffensive. That's the sound of instability leaking into the record. So the real question isn't whether Diddy's legal team is scrambling. That much is obvious. The real concern is what else exists, what other messages, calls, or documents could surface once subpoenas are formally issued. Because when a defense strategy depends on restraint and credibility, even one misstep can trigger a domino effect. And right now, it looks like the first domino has already fallen.
I think that the goal of what the film is trying to do is to let the audience kind of come in to ask questions like, you know, in a trial where there's so much media coverage, you know, before, during, and after, were there decisions, you know, colored by certain things, and who got the benefit of the doubt, you know, in that courtroom?
The Zeus Network documentary was supposed to be the Combs family's reset button. Their chance to flip the narrative, humanize Diddy, and reframe everything the public thought it knew about his conviction. On paper, it sounded like a controlled response, a family standing together, telling their side, reclaiming the story from Netflix and the headlines. But the trailer tells a very different story, and not in the way the family likely intended. What's striking isn't just what's said in the preview, but the tone. The documentary doesn't feel like a defense. It feels like preparation. Heavy emphasis on phrases like the lies, the pain, and what they took from us suggests a mindset focused less on clearing Diddy's name and more on emotionally bracing the audience for outcomes that might already be inevitable. Insiders who've seen early cuts describe a project that looks more like fallout management than truth-telling. There are scenes of the brothers watching trial footage in silence. No outrage. No certainty. Just long pauses and uncomfortable expressions. Christian's voice cracks as he says, "That's not the man I know," a line that sounds less like conviction and more like disbelief. Justin, meanwhile, stares directly into the camera, hesitating before answering questions, as if he's not fully convinced by what he's being asked to defend. That kind of hesitation doesn't reassure viewers. It invites doubt. And then there's what almost no one is openly discussing yet, the call logs. The night before Christian posted his now infamous tweet, Diddy made multiple calls from prison. Not one. 3. Each went to numbers linked to people in his son's inner circle. Each lasted between 12 and 18 minutes. Prison records confirm the timing. While the content of those calls hasn't been made public, the pattern alone raises eyebrows. This wasn't a casual check-in. This looked like coordination. For people familiar with high-profile incarceration cases, this suggests something far more serious. It implies Diddy may still be managing crises from behind bars, using his sons as extensions of his influence. If that's true, then Christian's tweet wasn't just a bad decision, it was a move made under pressure, possibly direction. That reframes everything. Instead of a reckless son acting independently, the situation starts to resemble a controlled sacrifice. A calculated risk where Christian takes the heat so the larger machine can keep moving. But that strategy assumes everyone involved understands the rules. And based on Christian's own words in the documentary, "I don't even know what's real anymore," that assumption looks dangerously wrong. Because that line doesn't sound like confidence. It sounds like exhaustion. Like someone who's been repeating a script for so long that he's lost track of where the truth ends and the defense begins. And if federal investigators interpret Christian's actions as coordinated behavior rather than personal missteps, the consequences won't stop with him. At that point, the documentary stops being a platform and starts becoming evidence. And that's the risk no one in the family seems willing to acknowledge publicly.
Yeah, this is a real issue. And I think Diddy's lawyers are right when you're talking about somebody who's not, supposed to not be able to be accessed in this way.
And that's super scary. If he, in fact, woke up with a knife to his throat, I mean, that's pretty...
The most revealing detail in all of this isn't what the family is saying, it's what they're refusing to acknowledge. At no point do they meaningfully address the power imbalance at the center of the case. Fame, money, access, and fear aren't abstract concepts here, they're the foundation of the allegations. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. It just makes the defense look unserious. This is where public opinion quietly turns. Not in outrage, not in headlines, but in credibility. Viewers don't need legal expertise to sense when a narrative is incomplete. When every explanation frames Diddy as a victim of misunderstanding rather than someone who held enormous leverage over people's careers, housing, finances, and safety, the story collapses under its own weight. What's worse is the framing of accountability as persecution. The documentary repeatedly implies that legal consequences are the result of jealousy, opportunism, or cultural backlash. That framing might resonate with loyal fans, but it fails with anyone paying attention to how federal cases actually work. Prosecutors don't build multi-year investigations because of internet noise. They do it because evidence stacks up. And evidence is cumulative. Witness statements don't exist in isolation. Financial records don't either. Travel logs, NDAs, settlement patterns, encrypted messages, none of these mean much alone. Together, they form a picture. That picture is what juries see. And no amount of emotional storytelling can override it once it's clear. There's also a strategic blind spot that's becoming impossible to ignore. By going public so aggressively, the family has limited their own future options. If contradictions emerge later, and they almost always do, they won't be judged against silence, but against statements already made. Every tearful declaration becomes a benchmark. Every denial becomes a potential inconsistency. This is why most defense teams recommend restraint. Silence isn't weakness, it's protection. The Combs family has chosen the opposite. They've chosen visibility. And visibility invites scrutiny. Meanwhile, the League of Consequences keeps expanding beyond the courtroom. Business partners are watching. Brands are watching. Executives who once stayed neutral are quietly distancing themselves. Not because of headlines, but because risk management has no sentimentality. Association itself becomes a liability when uncertainty persists. And uncertainty is exactly what this documentary amplifies. Instead of resolving questions, it raises new ones. Instead of clarifying timelines, it muddies them. Instead of narrowing the focus, it widens it, pulling more people, more moments, and more decisions into the frame. That's the opposite of what you want when legal exposure is already high. At some point, the family will have to decide whether they're fighting for public sympathy or legal survival. Those two goals are not the same. One requires emotion. The other requires discipline. Right now, discipline is losing. And the longer this continues, the more likely it becomes that prosecutors stop observing from a distance and start responding directly. Not to the allegations, but to the behavior happening in real time. Because when narratives begin to interfere with process, the system doesn't stay passive. It escalates.
They consider a pre-existing beef, right? For 20 years, right? It's me being uncomfortable with him suggesting that he takes me shopping. And it's not personal. This is why it never resulted in me doing anything to him or him doing anything to me.
Christian Combs may have just handed federal investigators exactly what they needed to permanently dismantle his father's legal defense. What was initially framed as a son standing up for his incarcerated father has now spiraled into something far more damaging. This was never supposed to be more than a public feud, a defensive reaction to a rival's Netflix expose. But the moment Christian decided to speak publicly, the entire operation began to unravel in real time. Sources inside the U.S. Attorney's Office have confirmed that Christian's now-deleted threat aimed at 50 Cent was not viewed as harmless bravado or social media posturing. Instead, it was flagged as a serious misstep, one that directly violated the strict terms surrounding Diddy's ongoing appeal and communication monitoring. Prosecutors reportedly wasted no time reacting. Draft subpoenas are already being prepared, targeting private communications within the Combs family and their extended inner circle. The tweet in question was posted at precisely 3:47 a.m. on December 18th, a detail that has not gone unnoticed. That same day, Zeus Network officially announced the Combs brothers' upcoming documentary series titled Response. To federal investigators and legal analysts, the timing alone raised immediate red flags. Within hours of the tweet going live, experts began dissecting a specific line referencing a baby's mother. What initially sounded like an offhand insult is now being interpreted in far more serious ways, either as a coded admission of undisclosed information or as a reckless attempt to provoke a response that could shift public focus. 50 Cent's legal team did not hesitate. Their response was swift, calculated, and devastating. They issued a $40 million defamation warning, released internal receipts, and leaked a text message chain showing Christian's own manager urgently pleading with him to stop and stand down. But the most troubling piece of evidence was a single screenshot, a portion of Diddy's prison call log. One entry was highlighted, the call placed the night before the tweet went live. That detail alone has intensified scrutiny and raised a chilling question. Was this really Christian acting on impulse, or was something else already in motion behind the scenes?
Know about this very public, long-standing feud that you've had with Sean Combs. So what brought you to this project?
Well, I just want to make really hit television. I like the idea of it being exciting, and I picked this project and started working on it about 5 months before I found Alex. And I know that she has the artistic integrity that it would take to make it.
This is where the story starts to bend in a way that makes even seasoned insiders uncomfortable. The so-called baby's mother comment wasn't just a throwaway insult or an emotional jab. That single line immediately raised red flags inside industry and legal circles because it appeared to reference something very specific, something that doesn't align with the narrative of a son simply reacting out of loyalty or anger. According to sources familiar with the situation, 50 Cent's team flagged that comment almost instantly. Not because it was offensive, but because it felt deliberate. To them, it landed as either a calculated attempt to bait a response or an accidental admission that there's more beneath the surface than anyone has publicly acknowledged. In high-level disputes like this, language matters. One poorly chosen phrase can open doors investigators didn't even know existed. What complicates things further is the broader context surrounding the Combs family right now. This isn't an isolated controversy. The family is already dealing with multiple active lawsuits involving Christian and his brother Justin. In both cases, the allegations echo some of the most damaging accusations leveled against their father. That parallel isn't lost on prosecutors. When patterns begin to repeat across generations, investigators stop asking if something is connected and start asking how. The timing of everything makes the situation feel almost engineered, yet oddly sloppy. The tweet goes live. It gets deleted. Zeus Network announces the brothers' documentary series. The family goes silent. None of these pieces fit cleanly together unless you assume someone, somewhere, isn't telling the full truth. And the silence from Diddy's camp since then doesn't read like confidence. It reads like containment. Behind the scenes, whispers are growing louder that Christian's outburst wasn't purely emotional. Some insiders believe it was directed, not scripted word for word, but nudged, encouraged, or at the very least approved. The night before the tweet, Diddy reportedly placed a collect call from Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution to a number registered to a burner phone. That number was later linked to someone inside his inner circle. Prison records confirm the call lasted just over 18 minutes. No one claims to know what was said, but the timing alone makes it impossible to ignore. This wasn't a random coincidence. It suggests coordination or, at minimum, influence. And that's where the narrative around Christian begins to fracture. For years, Diddy's team carefully positioned him as the composed one, the responsible heir, the son who could navigate chaos with intelligence and restraint, the one capable of protecting the family legacy when everything else was falling apart. So why, at the moment when restraint mattered most, did he suddenly appear reckless? Why did the supposed strategist become the liability? Some believe the answer lies in the Zeus documentary trailer itself. In one scene, Christian watches footage from his father's trial in silence, his expression blank. Then he quietly says, "I don't even know what's real anymore." That line isn't defiant. It isn't confident. It sounds like exhaustion. Like someone who has spent years repeating a version of events fed to him by others, and is now struggling to separate belief from reality. That's not the voice of someone in control. That's the voice of someone who's been coached for so long, he no longer recognizes when he's speaking for himself. At some point in every labor dispute, criminal case, or public reckoning, the conversation stops being about demands and starts being about power. Not perceived power. Not emotional power. Real leverage. And that is the moment we are watching unfold right now. What many of the loudest voices involved seem to misunderstand is that leverage is not created by anger, volume, or even solidarity alone. Leverage is created by alternatives, by scarcity, by irreplaceability, and most importantly, by consequences that the other side cannot afford to ignore. When those elements are missing, what looks like confidence from the inside often reads as recklessness from the outside. This is why the recent public statements, confrontational interviews, and emotionally charged declarations are not landing the way their authors expect. They feel powerful to say, but they reveal a dangerous assumption that the league, the system, or the institutions involved need these specific individuals more than the individuals need the system. And the data simply does not support that belief. Power does not exist in slogans. It exists in balance sheets, contracts, consumer behavior, and replacement costs. One of the clearest indicators of real leverage is demand sustained, repeatable demand that does not rely on promotion cycles or emotional moments. This is where the argument quietly collapses. When you examine ticket sales, broadcast ratings, merchandise revenue, and social engagement patterns, the growth of women's basketball is real, but it is not evenly distributed. A small number of players drive a disproportionate share of attention, revenue, and viewership. This is not unique to the WNBA. It is true in every professional league on earth. Stars move markets. Role players do not. Yet the current rhetoric treats the players as a monolith, as if every jersey sells the same, every name pulls the same crowd, and every absence would damage the product equally. That assumption is emotionally comforting, but economically false. This matters because owners and executives do not negotiate with feelings. They negotiate with projections. When a league runs the numbers on a potential work stoppage, they do not ask, who is angry? They ask, who will the audience follow elsewhere? If the answer is only a few, then the league adjusts around those few. Everyone else becomes replaceable labor in a system designed to survive disruption. That reality is harsh, but it is not personal. It is structural. This is where public posturing becomes counterproductive. When players openly antagonize ownership during active negotiations, especially with profanity and ultimatums, they are not speaking truth to power. They are signaling a lack of strategic discipline. Billionaires do not respond to public shaming by conceding ground. They respond by tightening timelines, freezing communication, and preparing contingency plans. And contingency plans already exist. The uncomfortable truth is that leagues can pause seasons. They can delay launches. They can restructure rosters. They can wait out players whose earning windows are shorter than ownership's patience. This asymmetry is why most successful unions choose targeted pressure over emotional confrontation. The goal is not to feel heard. The goal is to make inaction more expensive than compromise. Right now, that equation is not in the player's favor. Another major miscalculation lies in the misunderstanding of revenue itself. Demands for percentage splits sound persuasive until the underlying numbers are examined. Revenue sharing models only work when total revenue is large enough to sustain both sides. The NBA's 50-50 split functions because the league generates billions annually. The WNBA does not. It is still operating at a loss, subsidized by external ownership and partnerships. This is not an insult to the product. It is a stage of development. Demanding identical structures without identical scale is not progressive. It is mathematically incoherent. Owners are not refusing out of spite. They are refusing because agreeing to those terms would guarantee continued losses, discourage expansion, and repel future investors. No rational ownership group buys into a business model designed to bleed indefinitely. This is why comparisons to other leagues consistently fall apart under scrutiny. Those leagues did not reach parity by demanding it before profitability. They reached it by growing revenue first, then negotiating splits once the pie was large enough to share sustainably. There is also a fundamental misunderstanding of alternatives. New leagues, exhibitions, and one-off events are being treated as proof of independence, evidence that players can thrive outside the system. But these examples confuse novelty with stability. Selling out a single, heavily promoted event is not the same as sustaining an 18-game season across multiple markets with consistent ratings and sponsor commitments. Scarcity drives novelty. Repetition tests loyalty. The difference between a promotional success and a viable league is not enthusiasm, it is endurance. Can it sell tickets in February? Can it maintain viewership without viral moments? Can it survive when the star players rest or leave? Until those questions are answered, these alternatives are leverage theater, not leverage reality. Meanwhile, the system players are challenging has already absorbed decades of losses and criticism. It has survived lockouts, scandals, declining ratings, and public backlash before. It knows how to wait. It knows how to outlast. This is why silence from ownership is more dangerous than confrontation. Silence means decisions have already been made internally. It means timelines are being evaluated without emotional input. It means legal teams, not PR teams, are in control. And legal teams think long-term. They understand that every public statement becomes part of the record, that every interview can be subpoenaed, that every contradiction becomes ammunition. While players speak to cameras, owners speak to accountants and attorneys. That asymmetry is where power quietly shifts. The tragedy here is that many of the players' concerns are legitimate. Housing instability, short contracts, mid-season trades, and income volatility are real issues. But when those issues are framed as moral ultimatums rather than negotiable terms, they become obstacles instead of solutions. If housing were the core issue, it could be resolved quickly. The fact that it has become symbolic reveals how far apart the sides truly are on revenue. Symbolic battles happen when foundational agreement is missing. At this stage, the question is no longer who is right. It is who can afford to wait. Owners can wait years. Players cannot. Careers are short. Bodies break down. Windows close. That reality does not disappear because it is uncomfortable. Public sympathy does not pay salaries. Viral clips do not fund pensions. Moral certainty does not balance budgets. Only leverage does. And leverage right now is concentrated in a very small number of hands, far fewer than the rhetoric suggests. If this dispute continues on its current path, the outcome will not be a dramatic showdown. It will be a quiet recalibration. Delayed seasons. Reworked contracts. Selective concessions. And eventually, a return under terms far closer to ownership's position than the players expect. That is how these standoffs usually end. Not with victory speeches, but with reality asserting itself.